I'm going to show you my simple technique to get this CMYK halftone print effect using After Effects and Photoshop that you can apply to animations and video footage too. Now there are a few techniques to get black and white halftones in After Effects, but here's how to do this with CMYK colors with all their channels separated, and we're going to have a bit of help from Photoshop as well. Let's get started making this animation, and then we're going to apply the effects to it. And this is pretty simple to build. So I'm going to start in a new comp, it's 2 seconds long, and we've got 3 circles in the middle. Mine's cyan, magenta, and yellow to highlight how the effect works, but that's not necessary for the print effect at all. So first, let's select them all and change their blending mode from normal to multiply, which mimics how overlaid ink would look when printed. And here we can see in the middle where they meet, where there's some overlap, our colors have changed. Where the cyan and magenta meet, we get a blue. Where magenta and yellow meet, we get a red. And where yellow and cyan meet, we get a green. If we select any one of them and move it closer, you can see where all 3 of them overlap, we get black, exactly how they would on a printing press. So let's undo that. And at the start of our timeline, I want to select them all and keyframe their position by pressing P on our keyboard and hitting the stopwatch. And at 1 second in, I want them all to move closer to the center. Now I want a guide for the center, so I'm going to select down here and choose Title Action Safe, which gives me this crosshair to use as a reference. And then I'm going to select each of the circles and then just nudge it towards the center. And then adjust them so it looks like they line up equally. There we are. Now I've got the animation of them coming into the center. At the end, I'm just going to copy and paste these first keyframes for each of the layers, and then I'm going to drag these 1 frame over to the very end of our comp, because After Effects won't let you edit keyframes directly on this last frame here, because it's not visible, but we need our keyframes to be there, so we get a nice seamless loop. So now we've got a looping animation of these. Now let's select all of these keyframes and press F9 on our keyboard to easy ease them, so that that animation becomes a little bit smoother. And now let's rotate them. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New, and select Null Object, which creates a new null in the center. And let's rename that Rotation Null, because we always label our layers. And then select our 3 circle layers, and then parent them to that rotation null by using the pick whip. And then with that null selected, press R to bring up our rotation, keyframe it at the beginning at 0. And then at the very end, add 360. So it becomes 1 full rotation, and then drag that 1 to the right. And now we've got a looping rotation. Now the last thing I'm going to do to this is add some blur. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and add the effect Radial Blur. Now at the very beginning, I'm going to keyframe the amount at 10 pixels. At 12 frames in, let's go up to 50 pixels. So it gets quite a bit more blurred. Dare we go to 60? Let's do it. Let's go to 60 pixels. CPU's not going to like that. It'll be fine. And then when we get to the middle, let's select both of these keyframes and copy them and paste them. So we've got a 10 pixel blur here, then a 60 pixel blur, and then at the end, let's paste again. So we've got our 10 pixel keyframe at the very end. So it goes 10, 60, 10, 60, 10. So now it's blurring the most where our circles are moving the fastest in between their easing. And let's select all of these and easy ease those with F9. And let's see how that looks. All right, that's looking pretty good. I really like the radial blur effect. And if you want to add something a little bit extra, you can duplicate this effect with Control D and change the type from spin to zoom. So then you get it blurring on the outside as well. And that can look pretty neat as well. I might just keep it with 1 radial blur though for now. There, we've got our base animation. Now let's add our color halftone effect. Now it's going to sound crazy at first, but it's honestly a much quicker process than it seems with a little help from our trusty friend Photoshop. So what we're going to do is apply the color halftone effect to every single rendered frame of our animation individually. Now that sounds like an absurd amount of work, but I'm going to show you how we can do that to just 1 of the frames and then automate the whole process with a few clicks, which is a really powerful technique that you can apply to many effects that are just available in Photoshop. So the first thing we need to do is render out our animation as a PNG sequence. So let's go up to Composition, add to Render Queue, and down here in the Output module, I'm going to click where it says Lossless and change the format from AVI to PNG sequence. These settings are fine for us, and then output it to a folder, which I'm going to call 01 CMY Circles OG, and render those out. Now in that folder, we've got a PNG rendered for each frame of that animation. Now let's select 1 in the middle where there's a lot of overlap, and let's open this in Photoshop. Now we're going to record a Photoshop action. You can get to that window by clicking this play button, which might be up here in your workspace, or go to Window and choose Action down here. And let's create a new action by clicking this icon, and let's call it CMYK Halftone 01, and give it a unique color so we can see it clearly over here, and then click Record. Now what Photoshop is doing now is recording every step, every edit that we make to this image, and then it saves it as a shortcut. And this can be really handy if you find yourself repeating the same processes over and over again. So all we need to do is go up to Filter, select Pixelate, and choose Color Halftone. Now we're going to leave the screen angles as they are, because they're already set to the standard CMYK angles. And at max radius, let's take this down to 6 pixels. Now the pixel width determines the scale of the halftone effect. What's the maximum radius of your dots? So experiment and see which works best for you. Here is what 4 pixels, 6 pixels, and 12 pixels looks like on this image. Then click OK, and we get our halftone effect. And then we need to go up to File, Save As, and save this image really anywhere out of the way. Where we save it doesn't matter, and then close this file. Now, even though it's closed, our action is still recording. So we need to go up to Window, View Action, and then click Stop. And now we can see here, our halftone action adds the color halftone effect, saves the document, and then closes it. So every time we select this action and click play, it will perform all of these steps to the document open. But we can take that further and apply that to all of our rendered frames by applying it as a batch. So let's go over to File, Automate, Batch, and here we can select what action it's going to play. We want it to play action CMYK Halftone 1, so that's good. Our source, we want to choose a folder, so let's choose where we rendered our PNG sequence and select that folder. And a destination folder, let's create a new one, and I'm going to call that O2 CMYK Halftones, and choose select folder. And make sure we tick override action save as commands. And that means that our save action that we have in our action here will be overwritten here, and instead it's just going to save it to this folder. And there's some options for your file naming, but this is all we need for now. Let's click OK, and it will batch this action. And now Photoshop is opening up all of those frames that we rendered, applying those effects, the halftone effects, saving them, and then closing them as fast as it can. And I haven't sped up this section. It's taking less than a second for each frame. And you can even minimize Photoshop and go about your business while this renders. It's hardly longer than some RAM previews in After Effects. There, we're done already. Now we just need to import it into After Effects. So in After Effects, I have a little import folder over here, and I'm going to press Ctrl-I to open up our import file window, find our color halftones folder. We only need to select the first one, and then make sure PNG sequence is selected, and import it as footage. And let's create a composition as well, and let's import that. So now we've imported that image sequence, and it's open in this composition. Here's what our effect looks like. There, now we can see that that color halftone has been applied to all of these frames. And there we just need to add a few more elements to make it look a bit more like some printed material. So here I've added 2 paper textures to match that print feel. And you can see how to make your own in my looping textures tutorial. This first one is just a rough paper background set to multiply, so it looks like our animation is printed on top of this. And then the very top one is some distressed paper as well, set to screen. So it adds these white speckles on top of everything, which makes it look like the ink is worn away in these areas. Now this still looks really smooth and digital. So to make it look a bit more printed, I'm going to add a wiggle expression on the position of our image sequence. I'm going to alt click the stopwatch here and type in wiggle 615, so 6 times a second. It will move this layer 15 pixels, so we get a nice bit of slight jittering. Now at the moment it looks a bit like a camera shake, so I'm going to lower the frame rate. So I'm going to create a new adjustment layer and add the effect Posterized Time. And we can set that to something really low. At the moment it's 24 frames per second, but we can set it as low as 6. Now here it looks really choppy, but it does make it look a bit more like stop motion, like we've printed and scanned these images in. And we can always change that up from 6 to maybe something like 12, if that's just a bit too intense for you. And we could have done this earlier in this comp here by pressing Ctrl-K and then changing the frame rate over here, so it would render out less images and take less time. So you might want to do that if you're applying this to a much longer animation that's going to take a long time to render, so you'll have fewer frames to deal with. But because this is such a short animation and the render times are barely anything, I like to have more control at the end here, where I can decide my frame rate up until the very last minute. And this just gives us way more options for when our client comes back and says, this looks laggy, we need to change it. And of course, you can apply these effects to any animation or even footage of your chihuahua, if you have one. And please take a deeper dive into the project file, which is available for free down in the description. I made a short playlist of some related videos that I think you'll enjoy if you've made it this far. I'll see you in the next video, and please consider subscribing if you'd like more of these videos every week.